The call that split the day the voice message was small and soft, the kind that slips under armor not by force but by truth. "Mommy, wake up, please wake up." Then a clatter, a muffled cry, and a second voice, even smaller. "Please, someone." "Come." Jonathan Everett, who'd learned to live inside calendars and earnings reports after loss hollowed him out, stopped breathing as the words washed over the boardroom's glass and steel. The pitch on-screen growth vectors, market expansion, all the usual choreography blurred to gray static. He replayed the message once, twice, a third time, as if repetition could explain why those children's voices felt like a door opening. Inside his chest, the number was blocked, the moment was not. "Cancel the rest," he said, already on his feet. No one argued. Outside, February light pressed like cold glass against the city. Jonathan took the wheel himself, tires whispering. Along the FDR, weaving past cabs and delivery vans. It made no practical sense, this sprint toward a need with no address. And yet he followed the only thread he had, a fleeting GPS ping from a call that had bounced through the Foundation's old hotline router years ago and somehow lit up again. The building on East 169th had a door that stuck and stairwells that remembered every footstep. The elevator was out, so he climbed, heart beating in time with the breathless, insistent purpose he hadn't felt since before the accident. Apartment 15D, the knock answered with silence, then a small whimper through wood grown thin from winters. He forced the door and stepped into a room that smelled of burned rice, talc, and worry. She lay on the kitchen tile, late 20s, hair loose, hand outstretched toward a cracked phone while two toddlers, twins in footed pajamas, held each other the way small soldiers might if their battlefield were a living room. "Mommy not." "Wake up," the boy whispered. "You came?" The girl asked, tugging Jonathan's sleeve as if she had hired him. He knelt, checked for a pulse, faint but there, laid his jacket over the woman and called 911 steady, because it had to be. As he turned her wrist to check her breathing, he noticed a crescent of pale scar near her forearm 3 inches, arcing like a memory, rain, glass, the pull of a stranger's strength through smoke and flame on the long Island Expressway 3. Years earlier, he had given his rescuer a card, a promise he never fulfilled because grief swallowed him whole. "Maya," he had croaked back then, "find me." She never did. But fate, stubborn and precise, found him anyway by way of small. Fingers and a random dial dot in the ER's chaos, alarms flared, orders snapped, gurneys moved like purposeful rivers. "Possible aneurysm prep CT now," a nurse barked. The twins clung to Jonathan as if he were furniture that didn't sway, their tears leaving dark blooms on his shirt. He held them and swallowed the ache of a name he hadn't said aloud. In public in a long time, Emma, his daughter, who did not get a second chance. When the surgeon finally appeared at dawn, eyes rimmed with red but kind, the verdict arrived like a door swinging both ways. "She's stable. It was dangerous, but we stopped the bleed." Relief lifted the room. Later, in the hush of recovery, Maya's lashes fluttered. She clocked the ceiling tiles, the private man in a tailored coat who stood as if the ground had rules again. "You made it," he said. "Your kids are asleep? They're safe." Her confusion gave way to recognition when he said his name. "You remember a highway," Jonathan added, voice quiet. "You dragged me out when I was beating the glass like a trapped animal. I never thanked you properly." She blinked, saw the way his gaze flicked to her scar and back. "Some people say thank you once. Others repay a debt with their whole life's direction." "I needed to hear that more than you know," she murmured, the monitor beeping a steadier rhythm. "But my twins Levi and Lena, they're with me," he promised. And the promise sounded like a vow built to bear weight. Then reality walked in wearing yesterday's mistakes. Security reported that a man had tried to bluff his way past the nurses in the night a familiar name to Maya. A mouthful of threats and appetite. Trey. He mentioned insurance. Jonathan said carefully, gauging the way her shoulders braced. "He knows you were recently approved for coverage." Shame and fear crossed her face like a storm front. "I left him for a reason," she whispered. "He doesn't chase love, he chases payouts." Jonathan's answer was steel wrapped in gentleness. he won't reach you again. In that moment, gratitude found a perimeter around fear. She had met rich men who treated kindness like a press release. This one spoke like a person who had lost more than money could patch. When he offered her not charity but work at the Everett Foundation, with a real salary, childcare, and a quiet apartment far from the peeling walls, she studied his face to see if the offer had an angle. It didn't. You saved my life once. He added, let me help you shape others. Sometimes rescue does not arrive with sirens, but with a seat at a table you never thought you'd be invited to. For my children, she said at last, voice unsteady but true, yes. A door with a lock that works the foundation's temporary apartment was the kind of modest that felt like dignity, clean lines, work in heat, a refrigerator full enough to quiet a worry you only notice when the hum goes silent. Morning brought the ordinary magic of clattering bowls and small feet chasing light across the carpet. Jonathan arrived in a wool coat and sleeves rolled, his presence unhurried. He set croissants and fruit on the counter as if breakfast were one more form of protection. Levi climbed him like a tree, and Lena tucked her bear beneath her chin, both at ease in a way that made Maya's heart pinch with an unfamiliar ache, safety stretching its limbs. After breakfast, the foundation's lobby widened around them. Like a breath, walls wore art made by children whose names were written in careful pen beneath bright swirls. Staff greeted Maya as a colleague in progress rather than a headline. In a conference room where statistics usually won the day, she stood and talked about bus routes and bedtimes, the hidden costs of diapers, the math of survival, no pie chart captures. People took notes. No one asked her to pose for a photo. Between tours and quiet cups of tea, Jonathan narrated what a job might demand and what it would protect. A salary timed like calm rain. Childcare aligned with school hours, a legal team that understood the difference between custody as a weapon and custody as care. I don't want to be your charity, she said, the edge of pride in her voice not sharp but necessary. I don't hire charities, he answered. I hire truth-tellers. You know the distance between a promise and a delivered service because you've walked it. In HR, a woman with gray streaks in her bun pushed a packet across the table. Benefits, schedule options, and a trauma-informed workplace policy, she said, eyes kind. The words landed like foreign currency that somehow purchased peace. Still, the shadow had not learned its lesson. A call came through. Trey had prowled the hospital again, asking questions with the entitlement of a man who confuses volume with authority. Security turned him away, but fear moves in a body the way a draft moves under a door. You feel it even when you can't see it. That evening, while the twins built towers with donated blocks, Jonathan laid a thin folder on the table and stepped back, not pushing it toward her, offering it like one does a flashlight. We did a preliminary background check, he said, voice low to keep the children's laughter the loudest sound. Debt, petty charges, protection orders that fizzled when threats turned witnesses quiet. This is not your fault, he told her, watching shame try to climb her cheeks. He chooses. You survive? She did not open the file. She had lived the contents. The knock the next afternoon was not loud, so much as disrespectful 3 thuds that said patience was a game for fools. Through the peephole, the familiar smirk, the tilt of a man who thinks the law is an obstacle. For other people? Open up, Maya, Trey called, the drawl sharpened by menace. You think some suit can hide you? A glance at her children crowned her fear with resolve. She ushered them behind the couch and whispered, Stay. Security arrived seconds later, the soft thud of trained footsteps filling the hall. Sir, you need to leave, one said. Trey laughed without humor. Tell your boss I'll be back for what's mine. The words hung like rusted hooks. When he finally swaggered toward the elevator, every part of Maya's body shook as if memory were a cold she couldn't shake. Jonathan reached her minutes later and dropped to one knee to meet her eyes. He will not touch you, he said. Each word clicked into place. Some promises you can hear building their own backbone. That night, sleep played coy. At dawn, the kitchen smelled like coffee and decision. Hiding isn't living, Maya said, eyes on the window's gray light. No, Jonathan agreed. So we don't hide, we prepare. The day became logistics braided with dignity. A meeting with the legal team to document everything in her voice, not in someone else's translation. A visit with a trauma counselor who regarded her not as a case but as a narrator of her own history. A tour of the Foundation's family wing, where women's laughter rose like a flag of what's possible. When the lead attorney said, "With your testimony and Mr. Everett's resources, we can secure a protection order swiftly," Maya exhaled a breath she did not know she'd been carrying since the twins were born. By evening, snow flurried. The kind that sticks to sleeves like sequins. The intercom buzzed. Security's voice was calm. "Someone is at the outer gate, claiming to be a relative?" Onathan's jaw settled. "Keep him out. I'm on my way down." "Don't," Maya started, the word pulled by every old script that said men duel and women tidy the aftermath. He paused with his coat half on. "I don't escalate," he sawed. "I deter." From the window she could see the choreography, Trey's jabbing finger, Jonathan's stillness, guards forming a quiet wall. It was not cinematic. There were no shouted speeches. It was simply one man unwilling to concede that fear gets the microphone. 10 minutes later, Jonathan returned, cheeks raw with cold, eyes steady. "He's been served notice that he's trespassing," he said. "Next time, the police." Maya nodded, the tremor in her hands easing. The twins stirred in their sleep, and the apartment returned to its hum. A door with a lock that worked. A promise with teeth. Learning how to stand without looking over the shoulder. Healing is dull work and glorious work. Pills and checkups, naps taken on purpose. Walking laps in hallways that smell like lemon cleaner while a nurse times your steps and calls it progress. Maya did it all because she had 2 reasons with sticky hands and bright eyes. At the Foundation, she began the soft launch of her role 2 hours a day at first, then 3. She sat with program leads and asked the sorts of questions binders don't predict. Who watches the kids when a mother goes to court? How do we build flexible attendance policies for people whose lives have more emergencies than calendar appointments? What's the plan for women who can't safely receive mail at their listed address? She wasn't an emblem. She was operations. Wearing lived experience. During one meeting, a donor asked a well-meaning but obtuse question about teaching resilience, and Maya's answer rearranged the room. "People in crisis don't need to be taught resilience," she said evenly. "They need the world to stop punishing them for being poor, for being scared, for being alive." Jonathan watched the board members absorb it, pride flickering across his otherwise controlled face. Later, in the hallway, he said, "You don't. Just tell the truth. You deliver it in a way that invites people to keep listening." She shrugged, suddenly shy. "I spent years being told I was too much or not enough. Turns out truth has a volume it likes." Levi and Lena began daycare in the building's early childhood center, where walls were painted in primary colors and the teachers sang names like melodies. They learned routines that sounded like the simple poetry of safety. Snack time, story, circle, 2-minute tidy. The first afternoon pickup, Lena marched out with a paper crown, solemn as a coronation, and Levi held a construction paper heart big enough to be a costume. "We made this for you, Mama," he declared. Maya smiled so wide it felt like her face was practicing a new muscle. Joy is not a luxury, it is evidence. Trey did not evaporate. People like him rarely do. There were sightings in the old apartment, loitering by the bodega where Maya used to buy milk with coins counted twice. Security maintained distance and documentation. The restraining order moved forward, each court date a knot in the rope of progress. In counseling, Maya learned that hypervigilance is a body's way of saying it loves you and wants you alive. She also learned to thank it and ask it to quiet down when the room was, in fact, safe. Sometimes she cried because relief is heavy too. Sometimes she laughed at nothing because laughter isn't nothing at all. One late afternoon, as the city folded itself into early darkness, Jonathan found Maya in the small office he'd told her to call hers. She was organizing notes from interviews with mothers in the shelter network, scribbles about bus vouchers, diaper sizes, a night class that should be offered in 2 languages. "I've seen a lot of directors present decks," he said, leaning in the doorway, hands in pockets. You're the first to present a map of missing bridges. She rolled her eyes at the compliment but slid the notes his way. We'll need funding shifts, she said. And a small emergency grant line that staff can approve without approvals that take 3 weeks. Done, he said and meant it. He mentioned Emma only when it felt right, which meant not often, and always with a softness that told you grief can be a companion, not a tyrant. One evening he described her off-key lullabies, how she would deliberately sing the wrong word because it made her father laugh. Kids are natural engineers of joy, Maya said, and he smiled, a real one, the kind that works the eyes. There was something else threaded between them now. Gratitude hardened into trust. Trust brightened into a kind of earned tenderness that neither of them rushed to name. Then, a message arrived that tightened the air. The legal team learned Trey was speaking to men who treat debt like a sport and people like chips. He thinks your life has a price tag, Jonathan said quietly, furious not in volume but in focus. He is wrong, Maya replied, and her voice didn't shake. She let the fear pass through her and leave by the same door it entered. The next day, she and Jonathan rehearsed a plan the way one rehearses a fire drill. Not because you want it, but because you deserve to be ready, codes, contacts, who to call if a shadow thickened. They turned dread into choreography and choreography into ordinary confidence. On Friday, the foundation hosted a small round table with city partners about streamlining services. Maya spoke once, twice, measured, and clear. Afterward, an administrator from a clinic pulled her aside. We've wanted to fix half of what you named, but we didn't have anyone to say it out loud. Maya tucked that sentence away where she keeps encouragement near the front, reachable in the bag. At home, the twins asked for pancakes for dinner, a luxury she'd once calculated out of reach. She made them and felt no guilt. Survival had been her curriculum for years. Now she was learning abundance without apology. When fear shows up wearing yesterday's clothes the day Trey crossed a line, the sky wore a brittle blue that makes winter look kind even when it bites. Maya and the twins were leaving the foundations daycare wing, mittened and giggling, when a figure broke from the small crowd beyond the security checkpoint. He didn't touch them. He didn't have to. He called her name with that tone of private invasion that strips vowels of their safety. Maya, we need to talk. Jonathan was in the lobby, already mid-conversation with a program lead, and pivoted so fast the air felt it. Security closed the small distance in seconds, interposing shoulders and policy. Trey laughed like he'd scored a point. So this is how it is? Hiding behind money? He tried to catch Levi's eye as if children were leverage. Jonathan stepped forward, voice quiet. You will back away now. No threat. Just a sentence with authority built in, the police report would later catalog the basics: violation of a temporary protection order, attempted intimidation, removal by officers. What it could not record was the choreography of care that followed. A counselor took Maya and the twins into a side room lined with quilts and plush animals. A staffer fetched warm cocoa and apple slices. Jonathan stood outside the glass, speaking to officers with a posture that said he would stay as long as it took. When it was done, he asked Maya whether she wanted to file for a permanent order and pursue charges. I want to do what keeps. U.S. free, she said, and her jaw did not tremble. Then we do that, he answered. Legal steps are both balm and bureaucracy. There were forms with boxes that do not hold whole stories, affidavits that demand you summarize years into a paragraph. Maya did it because she had finally learned the difference between revisiting pain and refusing to be its employee. In court, she wore a navy sweater and told the truth, her voice steady even when memory tried to pinch it. The judge listened, looked at the photos, the notes. She signed the order with a pen that had done this before and would do it again. And Maya breathed the way a person does at the end of a long tunnel. Life resumed not because danger vanished, but because she decided. Fear doesn't get all the hours. She built a routine: daycare drop-off, a morning meeting with the housing team, lunch with the outreach lead to design a weekend pop-up clinic where women could get legal advice without stepping into buildings that frightened them. She saved. In a small envelope that read first grade shoes, though first grade was still far off. She taught Levi to say, "No, thank you," with a cheerful firmness, and Lena to tie bows with patience. At night, when the apartment turned quiet, she sometimes stood by the window and watched the city throw constellations of light across dark glass. She thought about how gratitude and terror had been roommates in her chest for years. Lately, gratitude was slowly asking terror to move out. One evening, Jonathan brought a stack of drafts for a campaign the foundation was running, Courage as a Community. He asked if she would review copy for tone. "We're not trying to sell heroics," he said. "We're trying to normalize asking for help." She scribbled notes in the margins, fewer adjectives, more specifics. "Never call survivors broken, call systems broken. Show phone numbers prominently. Put bus routes in the footer." They ordered takeout and worked at the kitchen table while the twins narrated an elaborate game with wooden animals. Somewhere between "add a second Spanish phone line" and "the bear needs a hat," their eyes met. There was a warmth there that did not require a name to exist. What mattered is that it was kind. Not all days were tidy. Some were scaffolded by worry. On one of them, news came that Trey had posted a slurry of threats online. The legal team captured everything. "He wants attention," Jonathan said. "He gets documentation." Maya nodded. Tired but unshaken. "He wants me to stop living," she said. "I won't." That night, she tucked the twins into bed with a story that changed the ending every time just to prove to them, and to herself, that endings are not laws. They're choices, building bridges. Not just Exit Spring arrived like a rumor that turned out to be true. The Foundation's pilot program, the one Maya had sketched in messy handwriting her first month, launched across 3 partner shelters, flexible childcare stipends, on-site legal clinic hours, transportation vouchers, and a micro-grant fund for crises that do not fit neatly into old categories. It was mundane magic, the kind that looks like a bus arriving on time and a judge hearing a case because someone finally had the paperwork. The way the court prefers its boxes checked. At the kickoff meeting, Maya spoke briefly. "The point isn't to make hardship feel polite," she said. "The point is to make systems stop making it worse." The room didn't clap right away because people were busy absorbing something they hadn't had words for until then. When they did clap, it sounded like agreement, not applause. Stories began to loop back. A mother named Reina used a $200 grant to fix the alternator in her car and keep her job. Another, Tanisha, leveraged the clinic to get child support flowing. After years of chasing that particular ghost, a father, quiet and exhausted, cried in the hallway because someone finally believed he wasn't the villain in his custody case. Maya listened, adjusted, made the program better each week. She did not pretend to be a savior. She was a builder. Jonathan watched with a gratitude that felt like lightness he hadn't expected to feel again. He still attended investor calls, still signed things only he could sign, but his calendar now made space on purpose for sitting in rooms where people said ordinary truths out loud. He spoke more about Claire and Emma when it felt like honoring rather than trespassing. On the anniversary of the accident, he skipped the board dinner and instead brought flowers to the small patch of park where Emma had once learned to wobble on a tiny bike. Maya joined him, the twins toddling between benches, their laughter stitching. Color through the day, they didn't hold hands. They stood near. There's a difference, quiet and respectful, and they both could feel it. He told a story about how Emma used to insist clouds looked like animals long after the shapes had collapsed back into sky. She was very persuasive, he said, smiling. "Sounds familiar," Maya answered, and he laughed, the sound clean. And surprised, the case against Trey moved in that slow way justice often does when it is careful. There were court dates, continuances, the grinding work of converting harm into language that qualifies for consequences. He violated the order twice more, each time with less swagger as the consequences grew more concrete. Eventually, a judge made it explicit and unavoidable: jail time for the violations, mandatory counseling, and a probationary period with a leash long enough to walk but short enough to remind. Mayao did not celebrate. She did not gloat. She exhaled and went back to printing bus vouchers. Survival is not a competition. It is a practice. One Thursday, the foundation hosted a small ceremony, not a gala, not a performative parade, just a gathering to mark the expansion of the pilot into city policy. The commissioner spoke, a shelter director spoke, and then Jonathan surprised Maya by calling her to the front. Panic flickered. She preferred tables to stages. He kept it simple. The work works because the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution, he said. Maya taught us that by insisting on it. She stepped to the microphone, looked out at faces, some polished, some tired, many hopeful, and chose one sentence she wanted on the record. "We are not here to admire problems," she said. "We are here to solve them and to make sure people have the power to solve their own." The applause came like weather you could count on. That night, after the twins finally surrendered to sleep, they sat by the window with tea. Outside, spring made the city smell like rain and new chalk on sidewalks. "Do you ever feel like you're allowed to be happy again?" Maya asked, the question as plain as bread. "I feel like happiness is a room I can stand in for a while," Jonathan said. "I don't lock the door. I know it has windows. But I also know I'm allowed to be there." She nodded, thinking of how many rooms she'd been told she could not enter. "I'm learning not to apologize when joy shows up." "Keep the door open," he said, and they both smiled, not at each other exactly, but with each other, which is sometimes better, the promise that builds a future by summer. Levi corrected strangers who confused him with his sister in that earnest toddler way. "I'm Levi, that's Lena, we are two." They were three. Actually, time had done its steady work, and their voices were confident in a way that made Maya's chest ache with gratitude. She had a calendar that included pediatric appointments scheduled weeks in advance instead of prayers whispered into gaps. She had a key fob for an office where people cared what she thought. She had a bank account with a buffer. And she had a future she'd begun to plan without superstition. The program she helped design was now a model the city cited, then neighboring cities, then a quiet mention in a national brief that did not name her but carried her fingerprints. She didn't need credit to sleep well. She needed outcomes. On days when the news made the world feel too big and too cruel, she clicked open the spreadsheet that tracked diapers, bus passes, legal consults. Numbers turn back into lives if you hold them long enough. She remembered each face. She kept going. One evening they held a small picnic in that same park where clouds stubbornly resembled dogs if you wanted them to. Staff brought sandwiches, toddlers stole each other's bubbles, and someone brought a portable speaker that played throwback songs at a humane volume. Jonathan arrived late. He'd testified at a city hearing about procurement rules that slowed relief and found Maya sitting on a blanket trimming strawberries for the kids. He sat, shoes off, like a man practicing ease. For a while they simply watched the twins chase a paper kite. Sometimes love stories are not about romance, they are about repair, about a community that decided to stand between harm and the people, who deserve mornings. As dusk folded the day, Maya spoke, not to make it dramatic but to make it real. "That first day," she said, "I thought I was losing everything." She glanced toward the twins, then back to him. "I didn't know that was the day I would start getting my life back." Jonathan listened the way a person does when listening is the point. "You did the hardest part," he said. "You said yes to a different ending?" She smiled. "You made a promise." He shook his head lightly. "We made a promise." They let the sentence settle. There was no fairy tale bow, just ordinary next steps. A fall preschool application. Attendance council meeting where Maya advocated for safer stairwells, because she remembered how stairs can turn danger into a residence. A new budget line item that paid survivors to train caseworkers, because expertise deserves a paycheck. A Saturday morning when Levi fell and skinned his knee and Jonathan taught him how to be brave and tender at once. Clean, bandage, breathe, try again. A conversation months later where Maya and Jonathan finally named the tenderness between them and chose to explore it at the pace of a family that already knew how precious time is. When the anniversary of the voicemail arrived, the small plea that rerouted a billionaire and reset a mother's life, Maya recorded a message of her own for the Foundation's hotline, the one that now rang in 3 languages and never went to a dead end. Her voice was steady, warm. "If you're calling," she said, It's because something hurts or something broke? You're not alone. Leave your name if you can. If you can't, that's okay. We will call you back if you want us to. Help is not a favor. Help is a right. We're here. Somewhere, a phone would light up and a person would decide to trust the future 1 inch. Somewhere else, a child would tug a sleeve and say, "You came," and someone would answer, "Yes," and mean it. Jonathan still kept his daughter's drawing 2 stick figures, a lopsided heart tucked in his wallet. Some days he took it out and didn't cry. Some days he did and was not ashamed of it. Grief and joy learned to sit side by side at his table without competing. Maya, who once measured a day by what she could keep from falling apart, now measured it by what she could build: bridges, programs, mornings that began with cereal and silly songs. A promise that held, and the twins? They learned to say their last name with pride and to write their first names like small banners. They grew into the kind of children who ask hard questions and expect real answers. They did not forget that once a stranger came because they asked, and that the stranger stayed until he wasn't a stranger anymore. If there is a moral, it is not that money saves you. It is that people with resources and people with grit, people who know how to open doors and people who demand doors be opened not once but for everyone, who knocks after you on the final summer night before preschool. Maya tucked Levi and Lena into bed and sat for a moment in the doorway, watching the soft rise and fall of twin chests. Jonathan leaned against the hall wall, quiet company. "We're okay," she said, half to him, half to the air, testing the sentence for structural integrity. "We're okay," he echoed, and they both knew it wasn't a spell. It was a statement of work done and work ongoing. Outside, the city continued its restless song. Inside, safety threaded itself through a home that used to be a hiding place and had become a beginning. The call that once broke a day had become an origin story. A mother stood, 2 children laughed in their sleep. A man kept his word, and tomorrow the door would open again for others, for more, for the kind of hope that learns the routes of buses and the names of judges and the schedules of naps, because that is what hope does when it grows up. It gets practical and stays beautiful.